Thank you all for coming. On behalf of the Select Board, I want to impress on you how urgent both the board and I feel about solving this problem. It's an embarrassment, it's a hazard, it's an inconvenience, it's an impediment to our daily lives that we do not deserve in a town like this. To some extent, we've been paralyzed by the multitude of options and trying to find the best comprehensive solution to the problem. The fact is that I think we are no longer at a place where we can find the optimum solution and pursue it. We have to find an option which can be implemented in the very near future. As I have done, find out what the obstacles are to getting to an end to this problem, and to put all of our efforts into pursuing the best, most available solution. I think you're going to hear about what the many options are, and the point is that it will just impede our progress if we try to analyze the benefits and deficiencies of all of the various options, and that we concentrate on our efforts on the one that we can achieve, which I believe very strongly is the tower in the Tricon Church, and that the issues that stand in the way of getting that job done are ones that we can manage, and we will devote all the resources that I can bring to bear on it to make that happen. So carry on and good luck.
Thank you. All right, so as Megan said, I am Jason Bulger, the town's Chief Technology Officer. We have a presentation here for you guys because it's really important. If you want to understand why the service is what it is today, you have to understand what happened to get here, the various bylaws and changes throughout time. So everybody sees the slide deck? Great. Very quickly, we're just going to start with some definitions, and looks like my little clicker doesn't advance. There we go. So first, RF, or radio frequency. These are the electromagnetic fields between a certain range of frequencies, 20 kilohertz to 300 gigahertz. Examples are radio waves, TV waves, microwaves. All of these are licensed and overseen by the FCC. Electromagnetic radiation, which is another thing that you'll hear when talking about cell phones, is in the entire range of frequency. So RF is a small subset of a much larger range of electromagnetic radiation that goes all the way up to gamma rays. Often when we discuss RF, or radio frequency, it's in the context of how much signal does something provide, or how much coverage will it get you. The other thing we need to just identify is what terms we use to refer to a cellular infrastructure, something that can provide service. So the term that I'm going to try to use, and you'll probably hear me make a mistake, but is wireless facility. That is what the bylaw refers to these as, a wireless facility, but it is anything like an antenna, a cell tower. Anytime you have something that can provide coverage for somebody, we're going to call that a wireless facility. It doesn't need to be a building, it can be a tower. So this is the brief history that I'm going to walk you down, and this slide's going to come up a few different times so you can kind of see where we're at. First, we're going to start with the Telecommunications Act of 1996. So what this did was create a federal law that related to the regulation of wireless service. It did a lot of other things, but it impacted telephone, cable TV, cellular, and a portion of that, Section 704, dealt with the siting of wireless communication facilities, and that's what impacts Concord and where we can and what power we have to control and regulate those facilities. So what it did was specifically prohibited state and local governments from creating regulations that prevent cellular infrastructure, so we can't say, no, they can't go anywhere. It also said we can't discriminate among carriers. If two carriers are equal, all things considered, we can't have a preference for one over another. But most importantly to this discussion, it also prevents municipalities from basing regulations on the environmental impacts of RF that a tower has, as long as a facility operates under the guidelines of the FCC, in other words, in terms of power. A municipality or state government cannot regulate or say that can't be there. Let's see. So Concord has had a long history with going through the different bylaws and the different changes. Our former director of planning and land management, Marcia Rasmussen, put together this wonderful memo that I've drawn on about a dozen times in my time here in Concord, which outlines all the different steps that Concord took to get to where we are today. And so that history is what I'm giving you now. And basically, less than 1 year later, the town saw that Telecommunications Act of 1996 and said, we need to do something. And so they added the word communication towers to the regular bylaw, just to say that those would fall under the current bylaw. At a 1997 special town meeting, just a year later, they put a moratorium on any new wireless facilities because they were anticipating the adoption of a wireless bylaw. One exception to that was that Emerson Hospital's wireless facility was already underway, so that was exempted from this change in the bylaw. And then in the 1998 annual town meeting, that was when they actually had a new wireless bylaw debuted, and it was voted on and approved at that town meeting. Just so you guys have a reference, in 1998, when that bylaw was passed, this is what the cell phone that people were carrying around. It did not have internet. You might have a snake game. So in 1998, we get the bylaw. So what does the bylaw say? Well, the bylaw did a lot of things. It basically provides the framework for how people apply for and receive a special permit that grants them the ability to put a wireless facility up. It also sets requirements and regulations on what these facilities can do, how high they can be, how far they need to be from things like schools or homes or historic districts. And it also adds other regulations like, not being able to be built in a wetland or a place where we get our water supply from. And it is section 7.8 of the town's bylaw, and I believe we have copies in the back if people are interested. So in addition to providing all these requirements, the other thing that it did was it created a district, a map essentially, that said these are the parcels that Concord thinks at the time, in 1998, that would be good to develop wireless facilities. They were advised by Sprint and other carriers that Route 2 was their primary concern. We want Route 2 coverage, and so as you'll see here, this is the district map. And that crosshatch is the areas that are permitted. I circled all of the small ones that weren't in the Route 2 corridor just to make it a little easier for you guys to see them. But Route 2 was definitely the emphasis, and there were some other parcels attached to it. Now, this map does not necessarily correspond to all the requirements in the actual text of the bylaw. So what we did is we took an analysis of all the parcels in town, and we produced this map, which it's a little hard to see, but bear with me. But all of the requirements, single-family homes, daycares, and schools, and historic districts, where a buffer was required in the bylaw, this map was the result. And to make it a little easier to see, we created another map. And basically, anything that's white is an area that in the text of the bylaw is permissible to develop a wireless facility. Everything else is off limits according to the bylaw. If you want to take a look at where our infrastructure is today, I dropped pins on the map. We have 4 sites that have more than one carrier on them. There are a couple other sites that have one carrier. And the main 4 are Emerson Hospital, the Middlesex School, Nersnack Hill, and the wastewater treatment facility on Bedford Road. So the 5th pin that you'll see is in Lincoln, Lincoln Corner, and that does provide a lot of coverage for Concord, so sometimes we do consider it. We look at the area where the Lincoln pin is, the Emerson pin, and the wastewater pin as a kind of a triangle, because as you're going to see on the map of the coverage maps, that the area in between all of those is kind of a dead zone for Concord. So next, we get to what happened in 2001, which was adding a provision in the bylaw to provide relief from the general requirements. So all of those things, the distance from schools, daycare centers, homes, all those requirements, there is an option for a relief from that, a way to get a waiver from the requirements. It was driven by some litigation against the town for people who were trying to cite something. They were arguing that our bylaw was in conflict with the federal law. And the town had to make a decision. Did they want to get rid of the bylaw that was not in compliance with the federal law, or did they want to add a waiver? And that's what they did. So the waiver says, here's all of the preferences. This is what the town wanted when they created the bylaw, but we also understand that federal law would preempt any local regulations, and that if you can prove that there's a coverage gap, then we can waive those requirements. The other thing I'll mention is there's setback requirements. As tall as a tower facility is, it has to be that far from the property line. One last minor change is that in 2003 and 2004, they did update the map to add a few parcels. Oh, I got ahead of myself there. Two parcels on Old Marlborough Road, and then the existing facility on Nersnack Hill was not actually in the map, so they added that as well. The last update to the bylaw was in 2014, and that was to update some language that had to do with modification of existing sites. So the federal law was clarified, and so we clarified our bylaw correspondingly. But since 2003 or 2004, there hasn't really been a substantial change, and that was really just to update the map. So of those 4 sites in Concord that hold at least 2 facilities or wireless carriers, I'm going to just walk through those and explain some deficiencies from the bylaw that they have. This is Middlesex School. Their facility is less than 120 feet from their school property, for school building rather, and that is on Lowell Road. The Nersnack Hill facility has 2 separate towers and then multiple carriers on each one. You can see here I drew probably not the distances, but I measured the distance. It's 133 feet to the closest single-family dwelling at Nersnack Hill. And there also are at least 25 single-family homes that I could count within a 1,000-foot buffer of those towers. Emerson Hospital has multiple carriers sited on it. You can kind of see at the top and right above the word Emerson Hospital, those are the antennas that they have up there. The Mass General Cancer Center is on site. You can see in the sign the towers behind it. It's about 700 feet to the nearest single-family home not owned by Emerson Hospital. The wastewater treatment plant on Bedford Road has about 15 single-family homes within 1,000 feet. It's also in a rare species habitat and adjacent to wetlands. So the point of mentioning this is just that all of our current sites that have infrastructure do not comply with the bylaw as it's written, and it would be very difficult, as you saw from the maps, to find sites that would accommodate all the requirements in the bylaw. So where does that leave us today? So what's happening routinely is that residents are filing complaints with the town manager's office to the select board, reaching out to their board representatives often about cellular coverage and safety concerns that result from it. We have compiled all of these, well, a large portion of those, that people who gave us the permission to do so, into impact statements that were presented to the board back in February at a meeting discussing this. We've also been collecting more, so when people write to us and they say we're really upset, we have had this situation happen to us and we want something done about it, we are trying to relay that message to people. Business owners routinely complain about the poor coverage. And then the select board took this up as a goal last year as a priority goal, to review the town's wireless communications policies and provide a plan toward addressing some of those and getting coverage in the town center area specifically. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why this is important, and at the end of this slide, I'm going to turn it over to the chief and the lieutenant to offer a little bit of their perspective on this, but people who are experiencing emergencies cannot communicate effectively in Concord, and it has become a public safety emergency. Parents cannot communicate with their children at many of the schools. Mutual aid, people who respond to Concord often rely on cellular communication to coordinate responses. The software and systems that these guys use in their response relies on wireless communication. And at this point, actually, I'll stop right there and I'll let, maybe Tom, you could start and just talk a little bit about how the fire department could use or does use wireless communication.
Sure, thank you, Jason. Tom Judge, I'm the fire chief, and I hate to read to you, but I think it's actually going to be easier if I just, is that better? Yes, better. Thank you. Tom Judge, I'm the fire chief in town. And I apologize for reading to you, but I think it's going to be easier if I read from a document that I produced in response to some questions about the issues we have. This letter is regarding poor cell coverage in town, including the downtown area. The lack of reliable cell service has had a negative impact on the operation of the fire department. And then I go on with some examples. Recently, this is from last December. Recently, while working at the town's annual holiday event in Concord Center, I was unable to communicate by phone with other staff working at the event, which necessitated face-to-face meetings. This example, while not very dramatic, illustrates the difficulty working in Concord Center and in the event of an emergency in Concord Center. Fire department access to cell service is critical. Like all emergency services, we have become heavily reliant on data for mission-critical information. Pre-incident planning is stored in a cloud-based environment, and access to that data is imperative to guide decision-making. Examples of that information include pre-plans, which include unique occupancy hazards, structural hazards, storage hazards, building photos, sketches, unusual fire loads, sprinkler connections, sprinkler system information, fire alarm system information, nearest hydrants, water main sizes, the projected fire flow needed based on the size of the building and the percentage of involvement in fire, utility shutoffs, and emergency contact numbers, to name a few. Another area of concern is the lack of reporting infrastructure around the centers. Starting in the 1990s and extending into the early 2000s, the fire department converted from a hardwired telegraph fire alarm system to a radio fire alarm system. The impact of this in areas that do not have reliable cell service is that the once familiar street boxes are no longer available. Prior to that conversion, any emergency could be reported simply by pulling the hook on the firebox and then waiting for the fire department to arrive. The cost of maintaining those systems and the prevalence of cell phone service caused the town to move to a radio-based system. The subsequent reduction in reliable cell phone service has now created the situation that there is often no way to report an emergency other than relocating to a spot that has cell service, if the emergency that you're experiencing allows you to do so. So that was my memo about 10 months ago. And then in talking with my assistant chiefs about this today, they pointed out a couple of other things. A recent, within the last year, a teacher at the high school who was attempting to call 911 while dealing outside with a student in crisis, and she could not make a phone call. She couldn't get cell service, but the position or the precarious location they were in, she couldn't leave the student either. So it just created a very difficult situation. As we're approaching the 250th celebration, we are going to be heavily reliant on data in public safety, and I'm sure many other organizations as well, but we're going to be heavily reliant on data to be successful with the missions that we're assigned. So that's a consideration for us as well. And it's very, very difficult for us to operate effectively around the centers. Within the last 3 months, I was at a call on Hubbard Street for a hazardous materials incident in a home, and I needed to communicate directly with a hazmat team leader who was responding from out of town, and I couldn't get in touch with him because I couldn't make a phone call. So it's, this is an ongoing problem for us, and, hopefully there's a resolution, because it presents great challenges for fire and police.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Chief. I just want to back up a little bit here. The Chief's presentation covers a lot of what we deal with and what we see, but they respond from their fire stations. We're on the road 24/7, and a lot of the area through downtown, there's no cell reception. So we can't communicate with our secondary communications through cell phones in this area at all. We do the Patriots Day Parade, we do Memorial Day events, we do parade, and we have to rely heavily on our radio systems to work. When in reality, we need that secondary communication piece to be able to communicate with our officers in the field. We give our officers cell phones. All the cruisers have computers in them. The computers are spotty at best in the downtown area, and it really handcuffs and hinders our ability to provide an effective response in a given situation. As the chief said, there was an incident up the high school. Not having that cell phone ability and that cell phone reception to be able to communicate that information, which may not necessarily need to go out over 911 back to the dispatchers to get it to us, or to communicate with people up at the high school, it makes us almost ineffective. And this has been a problem that's been going on since, I've been here since 1992, and it's been going on since then. So it's something that really needs to be addressed. It's something that we want to see addressed. And in light of the 250th celebration coming up, I don't think there's another choice on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant and Chief. Let me just share my screen again. Okay. So I'm just going to walk through some other impacts. We talked about public safety. Our business community is really struggling. I'm sure there might be some people here today. The Concord Business Partnership reaches out routinely for updates on this matter because that's what their constituents are asking them questions about. It really hampers their ability to both function as a business or as a landlord to get tenants, because people come in and they have point of sale systems that rely on cellular or other systems, and they can't use those in Concord. As both the chief and the lieutenant mentioned, the 250th is coming up. It's going to require a very large public safety planning and response, and going to rely on that coverage. And not only that, but we're expected to have tens or even hundreds of thousands of people visiting Concord over the course of several months to a year. And those people are going to need to communicate. They're going to get lost. They're going to look up maps. They're going to need to go out to eat. And without coverage, they're not going to be able to do those things. The town itself is a business. We operate a light plant. We operate public works. We operate public safety. These are all business units, and we use wireless communication in the conducting of our business. And it hampers our ability to do so many things. A large portion of the impact statements are actually town staff who say, we've had to adjust our operations in this way. Our asset management system doesn't work in the field, or this doesn't work here, so we have to make special accommodations for something. There's also an equity issue. 4 in 10 adults who are in lower incomes do not have home broadband or a desktop or laptop computer. They rely on cell phones to access the internet. Students rely on them to do homework. People use them to apply for jobs, and that's not possible in Concord, and it's disproportionately affecting those people who are lower income. And then finally, everybody who lives or visits Concord likely has a cell phone, and they likely have it with them, and they expect to be able to use their cell phone. I'm sure many people here today have one, or if they don't, they know where it is, and we rely on that in our life all the time. So what are we doing? So we've been doing some analysis, some working with stakeholders, communicating with people who are trying to actually, sign agreements to get sites going. We have an interdepartmental working group consisting of technology staff, GIS, town manager's office staff, building, health planning, and other land use departments. And we meet weekly, Megan and I and Chris Carmody, our risk and compliance manager, to discuss this issue and what we can do to keep it moving. We also have RF consultants who are independent consultants and analysts that we, the town, hire to vet any information that comes from wireless carriers, and also to do our own research, and also to provide guidance to us, the town. His name is Ivan. Ivan, help me with your last name. Pagasic. Thank you. And he is here tonight, so later when we get to the question and answer session, he'll be available to answer questions as well. We're using both computer-generated coverage data and also real-world coverage data. There are open source applications that people run on their phones all the time, and it sends little bits of data, and it's collected and crowdsourced so that we can actually see maps of real coverage, because a map is nice, but it's really nice to know where those calls drop and where they're solid. We're also sometimes can obtain carrier-provided data. It's usually difficult because they don't want to provide something that's proprietary and can affect their business. And we also have past reports. You know, the town, this is not a new issue. This is a report from 2003. I think you might have worked on this, or somebody you know did. And this basically looked at all of the issues back then at why are we not getting coverage? So this is not a new issue. We're not having to reinvent the wheel. In some cases, all the work is already done. We've also looked at any location that somebody's recommended to us. We have gone down that rabbit hole because we don't want to just discount something and assume that we have the best location. We've looked at flagpoles, private locations, public locations. We put the word out to the business community to say, if you have a location and you're open to building something, give us your address and we'll put it in and see if we can run the analysis there. So we spent a lot of time looking at alternative sites and also identifying why certain sites that haven't yet been developed haven't worked in the past. Here are some of the complications that we run into in Concord. Obviously, I mentioned the bylaw, and the reason I spent so much time is that the bylaw set us on a path where there was a lot of restrictions for citing things in Concord. And that is in large part how we got to where we are. We also have had applicants interested in building towers or facilities in Concord that have not had a pleasant experience at one board meeting or another. They have gone and thought that they would get a fair opportunity to speak, and they were not received well. And we now have a reputation for being kind of a hostile community to developers of this, to the point where when we talk to carriers, they sort of shrug and say, yeah, that's Concord. That's a no-go there. And that's disappointing because we're trying to get something to happen, and it's hard when the carriers don't even want to work with us because they don't believe that they will have a fair shake at a meeting. There's also been RFPs issued in the past that have fallen through for one reason or another. Kai's Road, the Umbrella, they've had responses to the RFPs, and sometimes there's been problems that the responses have generated, or there have been other issues at board meetings that have resulted in it not coming to fruition to an agreement. So when it comes to how you actually select a site, there's really just a few criteria. First of all is, what is the reception going to provide in that area? But also, remember, we're looking at this from a holistic and town-wide perspective. We're not just looking at Concord Center. We're not just looking at West Concord. We're looking at the whole town and trying to solve the whole town's problem, and not just with one carrier, but with all carriers. So how does it impact the reception? What is the time to actually getting that facility live? If two facilities are going to provide equal coverage, the one that can be developed in a year is going to be more advantageous than the one that takes 5 years. That's common sense, but we have to take that into consideration. And then siting and aesthetics. What is it going to do to the character of the town? How is it going to impact sight lines? How is it going to impact the feel of a location? And what other attributes does it comply with or not comply with that are in the bylaw? This February, we met with the select board, gave them a presentation, and they gave us clear guidance, and that was that they wanted to find the best sites. And the best sites were really focusing on the first two. How does it impact reception, and when can we get it done? Because the residents are banging their doors down saying we need to get something done. So now we're going to look at a couple maps. I have a larger map of this, and all of the maps I have tonight, I printed out 11 by 17. We'll be having available for people to grab them and take a look at them closer and even take them home if you'd like. But and as an example, the map you see on the left is some real world data that shows actual call signal strength along Route 2 and in the downtown area. The map on the right is some analysis done by Ivan that shows what we have today, and we can take that coverage analysis and sort of do hypotheticals. At 120 feet at this location, what would the coverage look like? A lot of the coverage maps that you'll see here tonight are in the 700 megahertz spectrum area. That is sort of the sweet spot for Verizon. I don't want to get into all the different spectrum that are used by carriers, but that is going to translate into your level of service, being able to make calls and access data networks. So here's that map a little bit bigger. You can see the 3 pins that are here are the wastewater treatment plant in the upper right-hand corner, Emerson Hospital on the left, and then that Lincoln site on the right, on the bottom. You can see that almost all of Concord Center and the Concord Carlisle High School into the Walden area are not light green. That is a dead zone. So next we're going to talk about that downtown area and give an update on current negotiations that are happening there. So at the Trinitarian Congregational Church, often abbreviated to Tricon Church, they had a Sprint facility in there for 25 years, and Sprint vacated last year. Sprint and T-Mobile have merged into one company, and T-Mobile is already in a downtown site. They didn't need to, so they vacated. The church and Verizon have been negotiating for quite a long time now, several months, and that is a private negotiation between Verizon or their consultants and the church. It's not something that the town has anything to do with. If they were to come to an agreement and sign a lease, they could then come to the town for a permit or for next steps. It's unclear exactly until we see the filing and the request if a special permit would be required. There was already one granted or grandfathered at this location, and so depending on the duration it takes for them to come to an agreement, it may require one or it may not. So we've been monitoring this, and the town has spoken with Verizon siting consultant at least a dozen times and often gets weekly or bi-weekly updates from that individual. And we have met with or spoken with the church at least 3 times from different staff to try to see what we can do to help the 2 parties come to an agreement. But this is outside of the town's hands or responsibility, but we're doing everything we can. We've also talked to people in the Board of Health office and the planning office and the building commissioner to find out how we can get ready for any anticipated filing so that we're not caught off guard and say, oh, let's give us a few weeks to think about what needs to happen. We're ready for any application that comes in so we can act quickly on that. If the Tricon Church gets signed and comes to an agreement with Verizon, that will largely address the center issue that you'll see here on this map, but it doesn't address the Concord Carlisle High School or the area to the south of it because of the topography and the distance anticipated, the fact that it's inside of a structure and it's not at quite the ideal height. It's not going to adequately cover the high school area, which leads us to the next area, which is that high school area. Some people have offered the Concord landfill as a possible option. This is town-owned property. It is within the overlay district, so that map that you saw with the swath along Route 2, it falls within that, and it has relatively few other concerns. There's Goose Pond that you can see in the corner of this picture that might have some issues, but in terms of the town bylaw, it doesn't have a lot of problems. We won't know until we really do the analysis by the ZBA if it does comply, but it could be a potential. The problems that we have with this site is that if we're looking to improve the coverage at the school, it's not the ideal site. It's 4,000 feet away from the school property, and it doesn't yield as good of coverage along Route 2 as the school site would. There's also, this is a capped landfill that's regulated by Mass DEP, and to do any construction there would require a permit from them. We've heard that they're more and more reluctant to do that because of the potential contaminants that are in the ground in this area. We also have issues with it abutting state land and being in the viewshed of potentially federal land. It's also adjacent to the Walden Woods. This area had a tower before. AT&T had an 86-foot high tower here before. They vacated that and did not resume that. There was a lot of pressure, and people did not like this particular site at the time. The landfill map, if you look at this, so the pin, the lowest pin, the one that's kind of right in the middle of Walden Pond State Reservation, would be the landfill area. And what you'll notice in this area here is that there's a pretty big gap. The school building itself is actually outside the green area, which is hard to see on this map, but it would help the coverage on the school campus for sure, but it would not add coverage for all of the school property. Compare that with a site at the school, and you'll see that that area inside the circle there disappears, and this site provides much better coverage. As I mentioned, the landfill and CCHS, the main part of the building, are 4,000 feet apart. The Emerson Hospital site is only about a mile, mile and a half away, and so you understand that 4,000 feet is quite a lot in terms of coverage. When we look at coverage and we talk about why is something only a mile away, those antennas are big and strong, can't they reach? The problem is not necessarily with the antennas, but you have to remember that your cell phone has to also send that signal back to the tower. So a tower can be made stronger, yes, but it's not useful and it's not permissible to go above a certain level, and it can only go as far as the devices that it is communicating to. So your phone is not allowed to have as much power as the antennas themselves. Obviously, you're putting it up to your head. So a phone has to be able to reach that facility. The Concord Carlisle High School location is governed by the regional school district. The school district has reached out to Verizon, or their siting consultant, to look at some possible areas on their property that would work. They've had 3 and they've reviewed them at a school committee meeting. Similar to the Tricon church negotiations, the school site is really something for the school committees to work with somebody on, but the town is prepared to help in any way possible because this is a town-wide issue, not a school issue. Coverage improving on the school site would help other sites in Concord and vice versa, so we're happy to help as much as we can. It would likely require a waiver from the bylaw because it is within 1,000 feet of the school, most likely. It would be a faster timeline, though, because of the not lacking the DEP issues that the landfill site has, and it would definitely provide the best coverage for the campus and the school itself. The school has taken a lot of measures to augment their lack of cellular coverage from both adding infrastructure inside and blue light systems that have been helping improve safety. I also mentioned that Concord, Carlisle, Maynard, Lincoln, and Lexington all have towers within 1,000 feet of schools. And the sites that have been proposed before, kind of all the way to the left of this image and even further from it, are not necessarily the locations that have to be. They're between 450 and 550 feet away from the edge of the school building, which is a lot further than the Middlesex school area. So where do we go from here? So the lack of reception is a public safety issue and something that a lot of people want to see addressed. It's having financial impacts in our community, and we're trying to get something done. How you can get involved. Well, thank you all for showing up today. This is a good step in the right direction. After this, I'm going to turn it over to Megan to let you guys ask questions and have her facilitate the question and answer session for any town staff or the wireless expert who's here. Coming to meetings like this, writing to the select board or the town manager and letting them know the issues that you've had or the perspective that you have is helpful, no matter how you feel about this issue. And then also remember, everybody here is a consumer. You all have a choice as to which carrier you have. The town has phased out its use of a carrier because of the inadequate coverage in the downtown area. And we have moved something like 100 different cell phones, tablets, and things to another carrier to get better coverage. It's still not as ideal as it would be if we had some more of these sites developed, but it's better than it was. So, explore options as you see fit. And I'll just mention that we have a survey because we realize that not everybody's comments and feedback might be captured here in the next hour or so. So we've got a survey. We have forms that everybody can take with a QR code. I'm going to leave this up for a minute for people on Zoom so that they can, take a picture of it with their camera. But we would like to get your feedback. The survey is very brief, but it does ask you, are you a Concord resident? Do you have kids in school? Whatever. The school has also got a survey separately, but this is really just focusing on the entire town, so any area that is of concern to you. So with us today, I just want to mention the town manager, Carrie LaFleur, is here. We have people from many departments, including health, light plant, public works, public safety, town manager's office, technology, schools, and we have our expert, Ivan. So with that, I'll turn it over to Megan, and maybe we can get into some questions.
Great, thank you very much. Excuse me. I think what we'll do is do some questions or comments in the room here, and then switch over. We do have a number of participants on Zoom as well. Is there anyone that would like to be the brave first one? Thank you.
I'll go first. I live on Shagbark Road, right next to the Acton line, so I want to make sure that Obviously, downtown coverage, high school coverage is important, but it goes beyond that area. In the recent storm that we had, where there were 100 trees down in Concord, we had a tree take down a telephone pole. There were live wires in the street. My wife tried to call 911 3 times, and the call would not go through because we didn't have Wi-Fi, which we rely on for our cell phones because the cell coverage is so bad. So we couldn't get in touch with the school. Our daughter was at the row a mile away from her house, but more importantly, the fact that you can't get through to 911, if it was a bigger issue, then obviously that's pretty scary. Thank you.
Thank you. This microphone.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Green. I'm one of the physicians at Emerson Hospital. I also live in the town. I'm one of the people who started this.
Would you mind just pulling the microphone up a little bit? Sorry.
So I'm one of the
Thank
physicians at Emerson Hospital, and I moved to the town in May of 2022. And my daughter, we were attending her Alcott kindergarten orientation, and that's the first time I learned that we have no coverage for pages from the emergency room. So I received 4 missed pages, 2 of which were patients who were having acute heart attacks. And I bring this up because as a member of the town, we want to take care of our town. And if the physicians at Emerson Hospital cannot reach the physicians that they need to in an emergency, and I've talked to multiple physicians who've had this issue, it is a huge safety issue for the town.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have some folks on Zoom. David?
Hi, my name is David Schoenbrunn, 1679 Lowell Road.
Hold on one second.
I
Can we
think
get the
that
Zoom audio?
when the bylaw was
Sorry,
created in
David,
'98,
just a minute. We're just
there were a lot of
handling the audio
concerns
here in the room.
about the impact of cell phone towers on public health.
Audio,
And
question if it doesn't-
that was based on a very small amount of research. We've had a lot more research in the last 25 years. We know that it's not nearly as harmful as we thought. And to be honest, the risk of not having cell phone coverage and the impact on emergency services,
Great feedback.
it far outweighs the potential risk. So in addition to looking at these options for towers, I would like the town in parallel to look at rescinding the bylaw, since it really no longer makes sense.
Thank you, David.
Can you mute and repeat his question for the people in the room? There's,
Okay, sorry about that, little technology problems. David on Zoom, if you weren't able to hear, said as we're looking at sites, if the town could consider rescinding the bylaw because the public safety concern is significant. Thank you. I don't see anyone else on Zoom, so we'll go back into the room over here. Thanks.
Hi, Vanessa Maroney in Carlisle. 50% of my family is in Concord most of the day at the high school. Last year I had a freshman, this year I have a freshman and a sophomore. And really, we've been dealing with the cell phone issues over the course of all through their preschool years, and never really thought about it too much. It was just sort of irritating. But then last year, when the pink dance was let out, the whole school, and there was total mayhem and all the carpools, the kids couldn't contact the parents couldn't contact the kids by text or phone. There was no communication any which way. And Uvalde had just happened a couple of months before that. And I thought, it was really kind of shocking to think that, thank God, this is a happy dance experience, but what if there had been a true town-wide emergency, and that makes me pretty fearful. Just a couple other points about, the ability you want your kids to be able to call for help. I know that the blue lights are going in, which is a fantastic improvement. Paying by phone for parking, I don't know if I've ever been able to actually do that from my car. I have to find the business first. And then just recently, I noticed what I'm thinking are suicide awareness or prevention signs at the railroad crossings with information to text or call. Don't you want to be able to reach somebody?
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you for all the
Yeah.
work that you all are doing on this. It's really important.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have two on Zoom, so we'll try the audio for Lisa, and if not, then just we'll give Lisa a try first. Can you see if we can hear you?
Are you referring to me?
Hold
Because
on one
I'm
second,
pronounced
Lisa. I'm gonna.
You have a button up here. You can just hit.
Okay, Lisa, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Liza Carter. I'm 34 Hubbard Street. So I have been subjected to the Sprint cell tower from the beginning. And I was very aware that the reason that the bylaw went in when it did was because people looked at the position of that cell tower and went, that is a terrible place to have a cell tower within 500 feet of two preschools and in the middle of a residential area. The research coming out actually does show that there is risk. And, you know, the most vulnerable people in our population should not be the guinea pigs. And that is all to say that that's one sort of conversation. The other one is absolutely we need better cell phone coverage. But let's look at places that are not going to impact the people in the same way that having it in the middle of a church, two preschools, my house, lots of other residential houses. It's a terrible location, and it doesn't, as your presentation said, doesn't address the full issue. And I'm also just going to say, on a process point, to have the whole meeting open up as a listening meeting with the presentation by Mr. Dane saying, and here's what we should do, is really not okay. That is not good process. That makes me really uncomfortable and suspicious of your motivations on what you're actually trying to achieve with this meeting, because you cannot set up a meeting to listen saying, and this is, we've already decided what the best solution is. So I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if I should repeat questions or if.
Could everybody hear that mostly? Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment, Liza. And we're going to go, sorry, one more on Zoom and then over here. So we had Daniel Hart next on Zoom.
Yes. Hi. Everyone, can you hear me?
Get on mute.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll try and be quick. So first of all, thank you for doing this. As someone who's, my family and I are at 61 West Street in West Concord. We've been here for about 5 years. And I'm so glad that this is happening right now because it's frankly for such a wonderful town, it's embarrassing how, and I'm just hearing some of the speakers tonight, the doctor, the parents, fellow parents, it's a huge safety concern not to have better cell phone coverage. I'm glad that the previous person who spoke wasn't suggesting that we shouldn't have better cell phone coverage. I was worried that that was the direction she was going in, but she was not. Because I personally have been so frustrated by the fact that this bylaw was ever passed, and Concord absolutely needs to sort of get up to speed and be consistent with the rest of the town is a wonderful town. We need to have better coverage. My question is about Concord Middle School, and I may have missed it, but I'm wondering if there's going to be anything done to address the cell phone coverage gap there, similar to CCHS. I know that there's a new school being built, and I'm sure that will be part of it. But again, same thing. I have a kid at the high school and a kid at the middle school, and it's equally bad in my experience. So I just wanted to ask that. Thanks very much again.
Thank you.
Can you answer the middle school question?
So the town obviously would like to see adequate coverage all over town, and we'll do whatever we can to make sure that we include that area. I know that in the building of the construction of the school, they can certainly take some additional measures to try to enhance coverage or provide Wi-Fi inside the building. But we'll definitely keep an eye on that as it's developed and see what the coverage looks like in that area and do what we can to expand the coverage there.
Thank you. We'll take a few people in the room, so please. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Leila Jacobson. I'm a Concord resident, and I come here as a parent of 2 adolescents, as well as a devoted children's public health advocate and researcher. Before moving here, I worked at the Children's Hospital Philadelphia, advocating for and ensuring teen safety. I want to acknowledge what we've heard a lot in the room, which is obviously the town, for public safety and emergency reasons, needs improved cell phone service. I don't think there is much question about that. But I also want to simultaneously voice strenuous concerns about citing it at the high school because of concerns as a protector of children's health. I think tonight yet we have not heard the magnitude of research, scientific, peer-reviewed research by scientists and academics documenting that in fact there are detrimental health effects, including cancer and infertility, from proximal exposure to this type of radiation. And I would encourage everyone in the room to read the commission that the state of New Hampshire did that is extensively documenting this, and loads of other research. But I feel like it's very disturbing, the low priority given to teen health and their developing minds and bodies relative to achieving a specific solution of having the tower on the CCHS campus. That doesn't mean we can't find a different solution. I think this town has been the source of such greatness over history when we reflect on it. The start of the American Revolution, the source of some of our greatest literature, including transformative naturalists, and the example for democracy and humanity throughout the region and country. So I have total confidence that we can find a solution to cell phone coverage without endangering our town's very own children. And I think the top priority of the school and the school committee should be the education and health of our children. And that's exactly what we heard from them at the orientation presentation. And we heard that mental health and wellness is one of the most pressing challenges facing the teens in Concord and Carlisle. But at the same time, here we are considering a decision that would knowingly and unnecessarily threaten their well-being and health beyond severe outcomes like cancer and like infertility. There are a slew of problems that relate to mental health, like depression, sleep problems, headaches, memory. And I want to remind all of us that in the 50s, we did not know the cancer impact of smoking. And in the 70s, we did not know the heart disease impact of red meat. But we know them well now. And we don't know the full impact of this type of exposure. These kids are growing up with it. So we already have science telling us there are health effects, and that is just now. We have no idea what it's going to be when they are adults, but we are responsible for them as their caretakers. So I just want us to take extra effort to think about this site. In the criteria you listed for the site selection, it did not say health. It said aesthetics, but it did not say health. And I think that needs to be revised. I think the public health, especially of our teens and children, needs to be prioritized. And I do want to say that I have heard the high school say that cell phones are a problem for teen mental health. And so someone just brought up suicide. We need to take everything into account and not let our hands be held by a financially motivated company. We need to lead the way, remembering all of the issues at hand. Lastly, I just want to celebrate our educators and our schools in Concord. We're so lucky to have amazing ones. And I want to remind us that these researchers are fellow educators, and they should be trusted far more than financially or commercially motivated companies. And so we need to find the sources of all the data that we consider and know that we can trust academics and trust research. They are doing this not for themselves. And we need to just take a second look at things that come from industry before we adopt them. So thank you very much.
Proximal exposure, you talked about the...
Oh, thank you. We're just going to do it at the microphone so people at home can hear too.
I want to look at a discussion on one specific issue that she raised. So can we
Yeah, can
Can
you
you go
come
to the
mic?
microphone? Yeah, just so they can hear, if you don't mind.
You raised a lot of good issues, and I think everybody acknowledges that we need to improve the cell phone coverage. The specific issue that you raised regarding proximal exposure that was brought up in a number of peer-reviewed studies, based on your reading of that, what is the safe distance that people are zeroing in on? Because the high school needs coverage, but I guess we don't want it sitting, maybe we don't want it sitting right on top of the school. How do we balance those things? What's proximal exposure in the scientific peer-reviewed literature? Can she maybe come back to?
Sure.
The New Hampshire Commission reviewed many, many studies and found that balancing the need for cell phone coverage and reasonable access with the health, that 1,640 feet or 500 meters is a safe zone. That is when the risk starts to level out. But above that, they found significantly higher rates of cancer. And that won't cover people who are extremely sensitive, but that will cover the majority of the population.
Thank you. I think we'll just go to, okay, sure.
And the size of does the outer perimeter of the school property, I'm curious if is that 500 meters away, or?
I don't think you're going to get 500 meters, a site that could accommodate it on the school property.
Okay.
And I just want to add, because it was claimed that the health wasn't mentioned, it was mentioned, and what was mentioned was that the federal law prohibits us from using health effects of RF from considering the site of a location. So it was mentioned, just not bringing up the health impacts.
Okay. We'll take a few more in person, and then we do have a few on Zoom, so thank you.
My name's Catherine Cantrell, and I live at Everett Gardens. And I'm here to speak up for the working person. I do home care, and everything is all the communication comes through the cell phone. Emails, texts, every day. I don't have a home line. I'm speaking up for all the people that work that don't have a home phone. Everybody, my kids, everybody left the landline and now has a cell phone. And when you don't have coverage, I have had to go to the front office at Concord Housing to ask to make a phone call because I had zero phone service. And so I'm just speaking up for all the people that need a phone to get to work or to get a call so that they can, it's like a dispatcher, to go out to work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take one more, and then we'll go to Zoom. Thanks.
Hi, I'm David Ropeek, 21 Baker.
Put the mic up. Just
Mic up.
There you
Hello.
go. Thank you.
I used to be on TV. I should know that. I'd like to speak to the legitimate concerns that people have about health from the standpoint of someone who taught the psychology of risk perception for 16 years at the Harvard School of Public Health. It is common that on controversial issues, people will cherry pick the science to say what they want to say. The New Hampshire study, which I've read and report, is an outlier, commonly used by people who advocate the health concern part more than the body of science currently suggests. But that's not my point. We debate the science for a long time. Towns debate the science over fluoridation of water. People debate the science over vaccines. People debate the science over climate change. We selectively pick, we all do, I do too, the way we want to see the science. For a long time, I have watched this issue. I've been a resident since the early 80s. First as an environmental reporter at Channel 5 in Boston, and then at the School of Public Health. So it's through that lens. And I have been disappointed, frankly, in the leadership of the town not having the courage, and I've said this publicly before, to look at what the body of the science says rather than the selective things that advocates on all sides will cherry pick and use. So I encourage, as the town makes its decision and takes seriously the health concerns, that it does so in the context of what government organizations around the world, some of the most environmentally conservative that there are, have said about the safety issue. And I'll leave it to the process to look at those details, but the body of the evidence is on one side of this, and there's some cherry picking on the other side that has driven policy so far, and I would hope it would not drive policy this time.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to Anne on Zoom, and then we'll go to Peter. Hold on just 1 second. Okay.
Hello. Actually, it's not Ann. It's her husband, Fred McWilliams. I'm at 196 Wright Road in Concord. And my original question was going to be quite simple, and that is, right now we're discussing macro site coverage. Have we considered microsite coverage for the most part? Because I think that will cover a lot of the other gap areas. But after listening to the last several comments, I agree with the last gentleman in the sense that we really need a consensus-based approach with respect to the risk and hazards associated with RF. Unfortunately, right now, we live in a land of a lot of misinformation. We see it all the time on the various different medias, and I think it's important that we actually maybe have that conversation, but not certainly in this forum at this point in time. We're trying to solve a specific problem. I think it's important to address it and maybe rise to that challenge. So thank you.
Thank you. I can just briefly address the microsite versus macrosite. So a macrosite is a tower, a large facility that can provide service to a large area. A microsite is something that is much smaller. You need a lot more of them, but they can help augment those macrosites. What we've heard from the carriers, because we did address this with them and asked them about the possibility of the downtown area being used for microsites, is that they always start with a macrosite first, and a microsite is used to augment it. Second, Verizon does not have Fios in Concord, which means they don't have fiber running through the entire town like they do in some other places. So that means that for them to get these microsites, they would have to lease the fiber from somebody else, which is a model that they tend not to do. But we have approached that with multiple carriers and tried to work on that. The other issue we have is that downtown has some failed conduit for the streetlights, where everything is now underground for the utilities. When we replace that, we certainly will put in some conduit for future use that can be used, whether it's for cameras or microsites or town Wi-Fi, whatever. That will be in there and have that option available. But right now, we couldn't add anything into those sites. And I think that's planned in maybe a few years. Maybe not. I don't know. It's going to be a few $1 million is what I've heard. So.
Thank you. Next, we have Peter on Zoom.
Hi, thank you. So I'd like to, I want to agree with the woman that spoke inside of the New Hampshire study. I apologize, I don't recall her name. But as not that I think that the New Hampshire study is in particular accurate, I don't know. But people like to cite their credentials. I'm trained as a scientist. I think that I've looked at the data and it's ambiguous. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer on the safety or risk with having a cell tower right over your school. Speaking of someone with a child in the school, when it's ambiguous, I would just as soon not have the tower right overhead. It's just like I wouldn't want to have it right over my house. We all do want better self-coverage, I agree, but I also agreed with Liza's point that this presentation felt like it was a fait accompli that was being pushed through, and that the decision had already essentially been made. The other question I would like to pose is we all have Wi-Fi calling at home. We have poor reception in our house, and we augment that with Wi-Fi.
Hands down.
The school seems to make it very difficult for the students to connect their phones to Wi-Fi. They probably have issues with their hardware, but they force them to log in every day, whereas all of the rest of us, I'm sure, have our phones set up so that we get to a network that we know, and it automatically connects, and we automatically can have Wi-Fi calling. So why can't it would be nice if the schools could make that possible, at least for the students and the faculty, to just be able to connect with their phones, and so they could make calls and they could send text messages without having to have a cell tower right over their heads.
Yeah, and I do believe the school has made some changes already for this year to expand the Wi-Fi, both geographically and also make it easier for students to not have to join through a guest portal. I noticed that recently when I was in Carlisle at the school there that shares the same Wi-Fi system. So I think they've done that, but I think that's a good point, just to help augment.
We're going to come back to the room so we can go to Marie.
Hi, yes, Marie Foley. I live in Littleton, but I've had a business in Concord Center since 1982, partially with my sister and then with myself here on Main Street. And I'm also president of the Chamber of Commerce. And I am here to represent the businesses in Concord Center and West Concord that we have spoken to about this. And there are key effects to the poor cellular service. And in addressing the Wi-Fi, sometimes that doesn't work in some of our businesses either, unfortunately. Many retailers rely on their cell phones and not landlines in their store location, so they are not able to call for emergency services or when there is shoplifting, but mostly if someone is having a medical emergency in our location. Most of our point of sale systems rely strictly on cell service. Credit card processing relies on it. Our customers cannot call a business or safety from our store or our hallways. In the event of a medical emergency, as we all know, 911 cannot be reached. And without strong sales, Concord's robust independent businesses, we just can't survive. This past weekend, the service went down in my store 8 times, and today it went down twice for a total of an hour. And customers do not want you writing down their credit card numbers, so that is business lost. They just walk out the door. And I think part of it is that Concord's become more of a destination. Therefore, there are more phones that are constantly scrolling, so doing their little spinning, so no one can get through. And many stores are still facing post-COVID challenges, and this issue is taking a bite. I understand the health concerns, but it would be nice if we could figure out this issue from a business point of view. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have others that want to speak in the room? Is that?
Sorry, Matt Camone. I would just ask that the town really consider the compost site more seriously, or in terms of making the Wi-Fi easier for the students to use Wi-Fi calling. With all due respect, the New Hampshire study, I took a look at it. I was wondering myself, and I took a look, and there is significant evidence by a state legislature. They commissioned the study. There's a UNH professor who has some videos on how they justified it. And there's data on, for instance, they cite a study in Brazil, where the deaths, I can't get the Wi-Fi to work, but I was trying to bring it up here. But they cite a study where the rate of cancer in the general population is 35 in 10,000. And the distance you go from a cell phone tower starts at like 100, goes down to about 700, and you see it drop from about 45 back down to 35. So, okay, it's not, we're not all going to drop dead from having a cell phone tower near us, but it does increase the rates of cancer to some degree. And then the study also cites a handful of other papers that also should talk about other effects. And, and why did the New Hampshire legislature do this? Because they felt the federal government had fallen down on investigating the health effects. And you can look at some of this professor's summary of it. They cite the fact that Harvard wrote a paper on how the FCC is captured. So it's well known that, it apparently is well known that our federal government has fallen down on this. There are some health effects, and we really need to balance the health effects of this choice of putting this near our kids against the other concerns of health, and I appreciate the emergency room as well. So that's why I really just ask that we consider that site much more greatly at the compost site, or do something about Wi-Fi calling in the high school. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll do another in the room and then go over to Zoom.
Good evening. My name is Mike Lynn, the resident of Concord. I have freshman and senior in high school. And I have a question in regards to the high school solution. Have we considered, or have you talked to Verizon, or have they even offered the stadium solution that they offer, that they currently have in place in some of the stadiums? I think AT&T also has that. These are small cell sites, distributed antenna systems, and they can, host up to 100,000 cell coverage in a small area. So obviously in high school, it's only a couple thousand students, so you wouldn't need that many. So, I mean, that's one way to address the cell coverage, because it's not Wi-Fi. It will look as a cell connection to any cell phone. Have we looked at that, or have they offered that?
They have not offered that as a solution. You could certainly ask the schools. I don't know if they want to speak to that, but we have asked specifically about portable units, smaller units that could provide temporary coverage for both the downtown area and that, and we were told that that was not eligible for that type of long-term usage until there was a solution in place.
Right. Yeah, and the stadium solution, you can look at it on the Verizon website. I think you search under stadium solution, and they can kind of show you what they do, and it's very effective. It looks, because imagine they can handle 100,000 football fans, soccer fans in the stadium, with no coverage drop, and with everyone zooming, streaming. So that's one. And the second point, this is a non-scientific. Is I work in the semiconductor industry, and my company and my colleagues support companies that develop phased array radars, RF amplifiers, all those things. And when I mentioned to them that, we're thinking about putting a cell tower at the high school, at the field, or close to it, unanimously, all the engineers, everyone say, no way, I would not want a cell tower, because they know how much RF power is delivered, regardless of how much you can cramp it down, right? You can limit how much power, but I would suggest not to put it by the school. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a couple people on Zoom, so we'll first go to Peter.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, there it is. Hi, so I just wanted to speak to a couple things that just came up. First would be the Wi-Fi calling issue and the last comment about kind of the power levels. So as someone who works currently at a electronics repair shop in Boston area and sees, many iPhones and Androids every day, I think to say that it's a very significant power issue and that we should be using the Wi-Fi calling is not really a good idea. A lot of these devices, the Wi-Fi calling drops out. We see plenty of people who come in because they say they're losing signal or their antennas aren't working very well. And those are the things that can have trouble on a phone, or where unless you have the newest or the most expensive phone, those who might not have the nicest phone available run into coverage issues much sooner and might not be able to have access to Wi-Fi calling. In addition, the Wi-Fi calling doesn't always have reliable location, so they may not see where you're calling from. So you're required when you set up Wi-Fi calling to put in your home address. And so in the case that you call emergency services, the information provided is its best attempt at where you are, but if you don't have enough coverage in the first place, it might not know your location accurately, and you could end up where it's signaling your home address and things like that. For the power level, I think it's kind of a strange issue to bring up. The school also has an AM radio station on it, and there's plenty other things that we use every day that generate a lot more kind of signal if that's the concern. And even looking through the, I assume it's the same study from New Hampshire State, It talks about things like Wi-Fi and suggests using, wired cables instead of wireless devices around the house. I don't really think that's the kind of study that matches the kind of body of knowledge right now, and the studies showing that, this is just radio signals. It's not like ionizing. It's known to be safe. And as someone who went to the high school and was there during the time when they moved from the old building to the new building, I feel that the students and the faculty were significantly hurting and left behind, that despite all these great improvements, the Wi-Fi was okay and better, but the cell coverage people felt didn't improve at all, or was sometimes even worse due to the new building and the way that the location and the structure block the signals from accessing the building effectively, just due to the nature of, the metallic structure. And people felt that this was, an issue in terms of the students can't get to their parents if they need to ride home, as well as people have mentioned, the potential safety concern of calling 911 if you're not physically in the building. Once you leave, maybe the auditorium area or the amphitheater area by the cafeteria. Once you're off of that concrete area, there's virtually no Wi-Fi coverage either. So unless they're planning to roll out to the entire campus, I don't see how Wi-Fi calling works as a, good solution.
So I'd just like to clarify, when I say the stadium solution, it is not Wi-Fi at all. It's an expanded 4G, 5G, so on a cell phone, it connects to your cell phone as if you have a cell tower right next to you. So it is not Wi-Fi calling at all. You act as just regular phone.
Would the stadium solution generate less RF than a tower?
Right, because it's much smaller antenna. It's just for a small area, right? There's a cell tower, you're trying to cover a big area, so RF power is fairly significant.
And so then you would still need another site for all the other areas?
Right. I mean, that's only applying to the high school problem. And then that will also cover the parking lot area. So if everyone goes out and it's, and I think what it does is it ties into the fiber that's going to school. So it's not relying on another tower nearby to communicate that information. So.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to David on Zoom and then Dory.
Thank you. People were mentioning their credentials, so I figured it'd probably be important to mention. I'm the head of IBM's public sector business for new technology adoption, including cloud and things like cell phone coverage. The New Hampshire study is well known as being cherry-picked, not just by people, but if you actually look closely at the data that the professor used, he picked a very, very narrow band of frequency. And other scientists looked at it more broadly. So it's important to kind of take it in context, as the professor from Harvard mentioned. What I think we can agree is there's enough information here from emergency services, from parents, from businesses, that the coverage we have is inadequate. We got to do something. And clearly, with so many people at the high school who use the high school both as students as well as after-school activity and its proximity to Route 2, we need some type of tower near there. As to the Verizon solution for stadiums, it's not really appropriate for a few reasons. One, it's very expensive. And the only reason Verizon does it is that they have enough advertising revenue from the 100,000 people that visit a stadium a few times a week. In this case, it would not be viable. It requires a huge amount of fiber to be run, and the power of each RF antenna is on the lower side. It doesn't tend to give you the type of coverage that we're seeking to solve the problem. So while it might seem convenient, it's not one that I would recommend we look at. The key question is we need a tower that covers the site where the high school is. Whether it is on the high school's property or not is a legitimate question, but we do need something close to it. The citing of distance and cancer, I would tell you that there's a lot of studies out there, and if you look carefully at them, some of them did not consider why people moved to the location, or the fact that the land closer to a tower once it's been built tends to be lower, and what impact that has on the relative health of people. It's not a simple issue to simply draw conclusions from a tiny set of data about proximity. It's really not at all a conclusion that most scientists would draw if you look over the expansive data. In terms of policy, I think our bylaws are hurting us. I do think that we need to revise those, and I do think we need cell coverage in this area. Whether it's on the site of the high school or not, I'm open to different discussion points, but it seems like at least we own the land in the high school, and so we could move quickly to resolve the problem. If we keep examining all these possible options, we're never going to get anywhere. We're never going to act. And so I think to Henry's earlier point, we need to pick a solution that we can actually act on to improve the situation for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Dory. Dory, you're muted.
Am I now unmuted?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good. My name is Dory Keogh, 51 MacArthur Road, and I have a very simple comment or question. Concord's not alone in this. We all have schools, we have families, we have a business section. How do other towns, which are even larger than ours, manage? And are we looking at other towns for suggestions and possible ways for us to handle this? I just throw that out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So Concord is kind of alone in this. I've worked in many other municipalities, and many others have here, and this is kind of a unique issue in Concord, and that's why we walked through the history of the bylaw. Other communities have partnerships between private parties and landowners and carriers, and they are able to resolve those and get sites built, and that has not happened in Concord. So some of the issues that we're seeing have absolutely happened in other places. There's always barriers to construction or issues, but the amount and the amount of time that it has taken to get downtown coverage where most people shop and work and live in Concord is kind of unique. So, and you know, I think many comments have come up about the bylaw. The bylaw set the tone for how the town was going to react to sites early on, and those people that were working here 10 or 15 years ago have told us the stories of how those conversations went, and I think that that set the tone for how we got to where we are.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Joseph Marr.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I'm at 588 Bedford Street. I'll start based on the last comment. Concord's taken so long, and we're here now because of the paralysis of analysis. I'm hearing things about health, and I'm hearing the data, which I've looked at the study. I'm hearing things about the convenience, business issues, and safety issues, right? They all have to come into play. But we're in a place where we've been analyzing this so long that we're paralyzed. So I'll just give a few quick comments. One is somebody who works in telecommunications. I can tell you cellular bonding is on the increase. That's where several phones or air cards are put together. So this problem is going to continue to get bigger and worse. Microsites might not address it, but I'm just, I'm telling you that things are on the horizon soon, that if we don't do something very soon, particularly with large carrier, we're just going to be chasing our tail. So I think we need a solution. The second is, I know it seems like it's a consumer decision, whether we have Verizon or AT&T, but not everyone has that choice. Be it someone who's low income, they have a business phone from a prescribed carrier, somebody who's got in a divorce situation where the spouse ex-spouse is providing the phone. So I would encourage us to look, if we're going to make a solution happen, at something that can end up being multiple carriers, if not right away, soon after. I think my big concern is the cost of waiting could start to be the lives of our children, residents, people with medical conditions. The Emerson doctor referred to it earlier. I think we're in a place where public safety and health is also on us to realize that cell phones are part of health and public safety today. And I'm not saying we shouldn't look at all different studies, but I've looked at enough of myself to say it's a real thing that school shootings happen, but it's also a real thing that people are in dire need of medical condition by schools. Those are issues that are going to face us and are facing us. And it seems like we're choosing what might be something that a few studies have said, not the American Cancer Society, against the safety of our kids today. And God forbid something major happen, we'll all wish we had just moved forward. So to me, it feels like it's time to move forward with whatever steps we need to take, knowing there is no perfect solution. And as somebody who have 3 kids, 2 that just left the high school and 1 in it, I'd be totally fine with a tower in the area, because it would feel safer to me to have a tower by the high school than the unsafe, I feel as a parent, of not having a tower by the high school.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another comment? Sorry, in the room?
Hi. Standing at a mic in a crowded room is like what my nightmares are made of. So I'm going to try to speak to you, but I'm going to read a little bit too. So I have concerns every time this conversation comes up in town, because it so quickly devolves to safe or not safe, and it gets very polarized. And I think it becomes unproductive. So I think all of us, even those of us who have concerns about safe health reasons, I think we all agree that public safety and people being able to use their phones is obviously very important. So I'm going to speak for some of the parents, but we are in support of adding a new cell tower. I think we are all in strong support of the composting site. In looking at a 2.4 square mile area, we are talking about if we add a tower at the composting site, 1 at Tricon, and then we have an existing site at Emerson, we are going from 1 weak signal to 3 in a 2.4 square mile area. So I think we can say that the coverage is going to greatly improve, like dramatically. And I'm not as eloquent as Dr. Jacobson, but I think that the research is mounting, and it is pretty compelling, and I think we need to remember the examples in history that Dr. Jacobson gave, but also if you remember asbestos, like the first paper that declared, hey, there might be a problem was in 1924. We didn't have an epidemiological study in the US until 1955, and then safety regulations that were semi-meaningful to protect people didn't come until 1974 or early 70s. So that's more than 50 years before like the first signal, like, hey, there might be a problem here, and then we acted to protect people. So I think we have unprecedented access to information now. We are informed citizens, we are informed town officials, and we actually do have legal rights as a municipality to say, hey, we like this site. That the Telecommunications Act is not going to stop us from thinking as a community and saying this is going to solve our problem and protect our kids. And I don't think we will regret ever putting the tower at the composting site. We will have improved coverage, and yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure.
My name is Rick Baxter. I have just a perspective. I've been a resident of the city for 72 hours.
Welcome.
And, you know, it's kind of nice coming to a nice meeting like this. I went from one city in California where I've lived for 40 years in Palo Alto to another nice city that has very different perspectives on this. I'll give you just a quick perspective on someone who's been here for 72 hours. I got my car delivered today, but the delivery guy could not get in contact with me because he couldn't figure out how to call me or anything. That was one problem. But going into our new house, I'm having trouble hooking up Wi-Fi because you need cell phone connection to deal with the router. So I'm now completely stuck with a house that has a nice fiber cable like we have in Palo Alto. Appreciate that, but I can't really connect it at this point in time. Also, I have a very nice alarm system. That alarm system should be, and this one is, it's a very nice Honeywell system, should have a cell phone card in it because you don't want a landline, and if you do, it could be cut. You always want to have a cell phone, can't have that. So that's just little things, and you're walking on the rail trail where I live nearby. It's a big time safety hazard. So that's just 72 hours worth of interesting things. Just another perspective from someone who spent the last 40 years. I just want to make sure people understand the difference between ionizing radiation and non-ionizing radiation. Huge difference. I spent 40 years of my life radiating myself 12 hours a day with ionizing radiation. And I know a huge number of people in my profession that did the same thing, and we're all alive and well. I don't know anybody that got cancer from the amount of radiation that I've received in a lifetime, as opposed to RF, which is non-ionizing and therefore does not break up DNA. It's a huge difference. RF is everywhere around us. It heats up cells and so forth, but it doesn't cause DNA damage. And that's been proven over and over again. And just my perspective, I think, I lived in a much more densely populated area than Concord, and the people of Palo Alto solved this problem without any difficulty at all. So I don't know where the cell towers are around town. You don't notice them, but we have very good coverage.
Thank you.
So
And
I'm
welcome.
glad to be here, different city.
Please.
Thanks. My name is Gail Heyer. I'm a Concord resident, middle school parent, and I also practice environmental law. I wanted to make a couple points reacting to what's been talked about, and then I have a statement to raise some really important things that haven't been mentioned. Jason's presentation said, we're prohibited from basing any local health concerns on FCC-regulated RF. I think the law, and I don't practice in the Telecommunication Act in particular, but I think the law says you can't deny a permit because of health concerns. It doesn't say you as a town can't consider health. So, and echoing what Alicia mentioned, you can certainly express a preference, whether it's based on health or not, but I think the law says you can't deny a permit based on health. And the second thing is, we heard a little bit about FCC being a captured agency, and we talked a lot about the New Hampshire study. The DC Circuit Federal Court of Appeals in 2021 actually found the FCC to be their failure to consider 11,000 pages of evidence of harm to human health and hundreds of comments from individual people who had been harmed by RF, non-ionizing radiation. This failure to consider these pages was arbitrary and capricious. They have not updated their safety guidelines since 1996. Jason showed the phone. That was probably 20 years after 1996. So this is a three-judge panel of the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals. They told the FCC, you're not treating this as giving this the importance that it warrants. And the FCC has so far publicly, or has not publicly said how they're going to address this remand order, so I think it remains to be seen. And that's why states like New Hampshire are looking carefully at the issue. So as I mentioned, I practice environmental law, and I often read and evaluate safety and health claims on various issues. And there are studies that show radiation is harmful to humans and the environment. There are studies, including many industry-funded ones, that say there is no risk. But what more than studies by dueling experts, what speaks to me in this case is what happened right here in Massachusetts in the town of Pittsfield. Verizon built a ground-mounted tower in a residential neighborhood. I think the tower went up during the pandemic or around that time. As soon as the tower was powered on, over a dozen people living near it became ill with symptoms of microwave sickness. I believe some of these people lived within maybe 400 or so feet of the tower. The Pittsfield Board of Health did a thorough investigation. They reviewed studies, they interviewed a variety of experts. They concluded that the tower caused the illness. It was a public nuisance, and in early 2022, they ordered Verizon to turn it off. Verizon refused, and the legal battle is ongoing. Tragically, some Pittsfield residents were forced to leave their homes. In lower radiation environments, their symptoms subside, If students do become ill from a cell tower at CCHS, the district may find itself responsible to fund their education in a place where they don't have symptoms, which can include fatigue, dizziness, headaches, nausea, ear ringing, vertigo, and problems with memory. The radiation that causes these symptoms comes from many sources: cell phones, Wi-Fi. We don't need a cell tower on the school campus that would just simply make this exposure worse. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. I don't have anyone else on Zoom. Is there anyone else that is here today that would like to make a statement or a question? Okay, well, oh yeah, please.
Can you go
Can
to
you
the
go to the
microphone?
microphone? Thanks.
I just have a question about the coverage maps you were showing. In the corner, it said Verizon coverage. Was the green representative of all the carriers or just Verizon?
Those maps were Verizon.
Is there any access to maps that show the coverage of all the carriers together?
We can put together any maps that we want. That's Ivan's job. When we ask him to make a map, he makes one for us.
I think that would be helpful educationally for us. And one other clarification, you said that this, I just want to make sure, the slide said that the CCHS tower would not improve the downtown reception addressing the police and fire chiefs' problems. Is that correct?
Well, so their problem is the entire town, right? Not just the downtown area, but the CCHS site or the landfill site, neither of them would adequately cover all of that gap that exists today in the downtown area. So carriers would like 2 sites to address the coverage gap.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, one more.
The safety thing really gets me anxious because I'm worried about it as well. I think we emailed ahead of time, but we were wondering if the town participates or the fire and police participate in the FCC's wireless priority service. And apparently we can sign up for this service and emergency responders can get priority on the networks. So it sounded like a good idea, and could we get our schools on there as well?
Yeah, we've signed up, but it doesn't impact your coverage, your ability to get coverage. Chief, do you want to speak to that?
We do participate in that, and it gives us access by, with T-Mobile, by dialing in using a number that then basically gets us to another dial tone where we now have priority service. But that is assuming that you have the coverage to make that first call.
Yeah.
So it's not something different than your regular cell service. What it does is it prioritizes your traffic over other traffic that's already hitting the tower, but you have to hit the tower.
We have a few more online. We have Liza and then Pamela.
Hi, so I've had Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile, and T-Mobile works great. I live right in the center of town. So I'm wondering if the person who did the map, I mean, I think the question of, where is the dead zone for all of them, and where does T-Mobile have its cell tower that addresses all my problems as someone who lives in the center of town?
T-Mobile does have a tower and a church in the center of town, the First Parish Church. So that's why you have good T-Mobile coverage downtown. And that is, I believe, what the public safety entities move to for the better downtown coverage. But it does not cover all of town. So I think the maps, and the reason why we're talking about Verizon a lot is because the majority of residents use Verizon, and that's why they're complaining about the extremely poor coverage.
Pamela next.
Thank you, 13 Concord Green. Why cannot the students at the high school use the Wi-Fi as when they feel they cannot get coverage? In fact, would we not be better off providing Wi-Fi as a town, public Wi-Fi, rather than risking the health aspects that are known of
Well, Wi-Fi operates in the same frequency ranges that cellular service does. So I don't think that if you had equal numbers of Wi-Fi access points above your head, it would change the conversation about RF exposure, and also might be more costly than perhaps a macro site far away that can provide coverage for data and phone. Ivan, is there anything else you would add to that, or did I? Oh, Lori, would you like to?
Yeah, it's good.
The superintendent is going to just say a few words.
Yeah, I just thought it'd be helpful to respond to some of the questions about the Wi-Fi extension. We had prohibited the kids from using their phones on the Wi-Fi up until this summer. That's simply a capacity issue. We spent the money to expand capacity, so now they are able to log their phone on, and yes, we do make them do it on a daily basis for the same reason, but they now can do that. They're allowed to do that, and they have the option to do that. We've pushed the Wi-Fi out through mesh Wi-Fi. Don't ask me what that means. I can just repeat it. As far out into the campus as we possibly could to try to get some level of signal pushed out. While I sat here, I had administrators dealing with a child with suicidal ideation out at the flagpole, and if that Wi-Fi expansion hadn't happened, I've been at that flagpole unable to reach anyone. That's where the story you heard was from. And at least this afternoon, they could reach into the building to the family and get the help that they needed. But I don't know what would have happened another few hundred yards away. So we're in just constant angst about all of this. If a really big event were to happen and we vacate, you know, the Alice drill tells the kids to run, we don't know how we would communicate them if they actually did. So there's grave conditions and serious concerns, and we do have to do something. And the Regional School Committee will continue that conversation based on this feedback.
Thank you, Dr. Hunter.
Thank you. Sure.
Yes.
But what you do matters. The quality of the decision.
I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for my board, and as the chair of the board, I understand that there is a variety of needs here that have different solutions, but we should not hold the available solutions hostage to the parts of the problem that are more complicated and will be more difficult to resolve. We have an available solution, and we are not helpless to implement that solution. We are not the victims of the private parties involved. We have considerable leverage, resources, and incentives that we can use to bring the private parties together on the one solution that will solve the problem for Concord Center and can solve it quickly, as long as we make it clear that that is the solution that the town has chosen to pursue, and that the other hypothetical solutions are not available. And as long as the Tricon solution is the best and the most, the one that can be achieved the soonest, we will do everything that we can to make sure that the alternatives do not get in the way of moving ahead on that. So I think that we can make this happen if we're willing to be very deliberate and forceful in order to get where we need to be. Otherwise, we'll be here years from now and will not have solved the problem. Thank you.
Thank you. We have another one on Zoom. We have Peter.
Oh, sorry. So that previous statement, I think, confirms what I had been feeling like, that this was a fait accompli, that the decision has already been made and you're just ramming it down everyone's throats, regardless of whether we agree or not. But as I said before, I don't, I agree that there needs to be better cell phone coverage. I find it interesting that only the Verizon map was shown. That wasn't clear to me when it was shown up on the screen. As far as the point about the cell tower using the same frequency as Wi-Fi, and that so there's no impact. Well, that's ridiculous, because it's not as if there's you have the equal amount of RF at the high school without a cell tower as with a cell tower, just because there's Wi-Fi present. They are already living with Wi-Fi, but it's a little bit disingenuous to suggest that, oh well, then because they have Wi-Fi, the cell tower is not going to change anything. So it's really unfortunate that it feels to me like this is one of those cases where you're hearing arguments that are just designed to kind of push the riffraff aside.
Thank you for your comment. We have one more on Zoom, Ann McWilliams.
We can't hear you, Ann.
Yeah, I just took a little bit for the unmute button to show up. But really briefly, this is Fred McWilliams again. I want to kind of sort of reiterate my suggestion that we have a separate offline conversation with respect to the health effects of RF. There's a lot of, for lack of a better way of putting it, misinformation that's being portrayed out there with respect to RF frequencies and everything else. And I would strongly suggest that we have a separate forum, perhaps to discuss that, and not necessarily in this forum. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, back into the room.
I just want to ask, so the compost site, with respect to the fait accompli comment, I mean, is the compost site still a consideration?
Yeah.
And right now, it's just that it's less preferred?
It's that there are barriers to that site that I mentioned. So the Mass DEP allowing the former landfill. Another thing I didn't mention is that the inverters at the solar site are up for replacement, and the people who own the contract for that site would like to expand the solar use of that property. So things like that are making the siting of that very difficult. And also knowing the past where we had a tower and we now no longer have a tower suggests that the viability of it is going to be more difficult than other sites.
They'll recognize that the photovoltaic
Well, so some of, yes, maybe perhaps some of it's a guess, but some of it is not a guess. So the being in the viewshed or adjacent to a state park is not a guess. Requiring the state permit for that is not a guess. The Mass DEP, those are not guesses.
No, I meant just why AT&T.
Oh yeah, well we were told by the carriers that it was because of pressure that they received.
Oh, pressure from.
Yeah.
I see. And so there's a partial concern over the coverage that I mean, it's a little slightly weaker coverage, and it's about time. I mean, is it just about time, permitting, how long it would take to get it, versus maybe not getting it at all?
So it's, yeah, a combination of coverage, inferior coverage, and longer time. So that's what makes it.
How much time do you have to say?
So we have asked for timelines. We know federal timelines because those are published in terms of the viewshed, Minuteman Park. If that's an issue, we've looked at that at Keyes Road, and we have an idea of the months that could take. It used to be years, but now we think that it would be under a year for that, for the state review and permitting. But it's unclear because until people actually study it from the board's perspective or who would have to issue the permit, we can't make a determination what would be tripped for that in terms of a review. So we can only hypothesize about some of the things that the state or other abutters might find for issues.
So what's the process then what is the process here going to be to decide?
Well, so the town doesn't control the school's property, right? So the school has consulted Verizon, independent of the town, to get options for so we're monitoring those discussions. The town is also looking for other sites. At the school committee presentation in August, they asked about the MBTA property where the rail lines are. We looked at the Concord Academy property nearby. We looked at the Mass DOT space along Route 2 to see if anything could fit along there and would have the accessibility required, and none of those locations seem to be suitable. So we're still waiting to hear back on the Concord Academy piece, but the other two didn't work.
Do you have a sense of time frame on
to get an answer on if they would be viable candidates?
I'm just curious. First town meeting I've ever been to.
Yeah.
How does this go? What's the process here?
Well, so part of the issue that we struggle with is that a lot of these negotiations are between private parties. The towns normally don't need to get involved in these conversations. They don't need to have forums like this to listen to people's concerns because people come to agreement on them and the regulations allow them to cite things where they want to. So we're trying to educate the public who ask us every day, why don't they have good coverage and how do they get better coverage as to where we are in the process.
We have another on Zoom. We have Pamela Dritt.
Again, why not at least investigate public Wi-Fi? And I also have T-Mobile and have no problems with connections everywhere except on some parts of the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. Why cannot you piggyback Verizon's up on the First Parish Tower where T-Mobile's is? What about the landfill?
She's an idiot.
I'll just very briefly say that when you look at 4G and 5G, there's a lot of different spectrum that they use to communicate, some much lower frequency that travels further, and then some much higher frequency that provides faster data services. So when you look at a cell site, it's going to provide a lot farther distance than a single Wi-Fi access point, which would be limited to a few hundred feet.
I'm talking about...
What's the downside of the town moving ahead and trying to put out an RFP for the sites that they do control, like the composting site, while the private parties are negotiating? Can we do that?
Yeah, so the select board asked us to find the best sites, and when we got the list of the coverage, it wasn't the best site. And so if a party at the best site is pursuing a possible option, we'd love for that to work without wasting a lot of money and staff time on a solution that's inferior.
To build on something that I said earlier, I encourage the decision makers in the various processes that this will play out under to look at the body of the evidence rather than, in my opinion, the cherry-picked evidence. But I would like to second what I think it was David, the guy who called in and said he doesn't particularly trust the Board of Selectmen. That's what I heard. And so I would urge that we, as a legal process, or a decision-making process, it's ultimately a political decision too, weigh the importance of democracy and listening to the health concerns legitimately, fairly, independently, and rationally, if I may. I'm sorry, that's an ugly word. Let me take the word back. Thoroughly about the body of the evidence. For example, there's been a lot of talk here about RF power. Correct me if I'm wrong, engineers in the room, but the RF power from a transmitter that goes out falls off by the square of the distance to the ground. So if it's 60 feet in the air, it's 3,600 times weaker standing at the base of the tower. There's a lot, I'm not going to get into the science, there's a lot of detail to the science that can be politicized. I urge the process to be careful and thorough and objective about the science, and I urge the decision makers to be open-minded to people's concerns, as they have been all the way through. But that might mean that some people in a democracy want things that they don't get.
Okay, thank you. Is there, one more? Sure.
So I had just a couple of questions. I have not experienced, I experienced a drop call once when I was driving to Alcott. But I have not experienced a lack of coverage at the high school. I have not experienced a lack of coverage in a lot of the places that are have been called dead zones tonight. So it occurs to me that there's a difference between coverage and capacity, and perhaps the towers that I can access, like at night, maybe when there's not a lot of people on network, can those towers be turned up so that the capacity would be greater for busy times? So that's one question, perhaps for the RF gentleman here. And then my second idea is, what if the town just built a tower and did all the permitting that was required, and then said to the carriers, hey, we have a tower, come and put your equipment on it? Like, has that been considered?
Yeah, the town does that at Nersnack Hill and Bedford Road. And the town has issued RFPs for that in the past that fell apart, but.
So you've issued RFPs for folks to put more equipment on the existing towers?
No, for the town to have facilities itself.
Oh, so you've issued RFPs to like the engineers or whatever who would physically build the tower? Right. When was the last time that was done?
2018, maybe?
Okay. I feel like that might kind of cut across the waiting game. Like, why would Verizon want to try to site a tower at the landfill if one's going up at Tricon? So if you just built one and said, here, put your equipment on it, that might be easier. At least there is a tower and it can be used. There's just some ideas that.
Yeah, Ivan, do you want to talk about the capacity question about can existing infrastructure be tweaked to?
So typically the carriers, they build out a site and they build out multiple frequency bands at a site and plan for capacity. And they typically start out, building out certain bands, certain frequency bands, if they're new to a market. Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile are mature in the market. When they build out a site, they build it out typically to maximum capacity. Some of the issues that you find are, with carriers, coverage and capacity are the two things that drive their business, okay? Churn rate is an issue. If you get a busy signal, you can't access the network, you go to another carrier. So they want to make sure they have enough capacity to support users in an area, and they monitor data from cell sites regularly, so they can tell how many calls are going through a cell site, what's their peak busy times, and you'll find busy times 4 to 6 p.m., right? People on the roads. They have to plan enough capacity to support those busy times. What's happened over the years is when they first built out in the mid-90s, and late 90s, early 2000s, they built out sites to cover major thoroughfares. And then, as more people started using cell phones, they noticed cell sites were getting close to a point where they were going to busy. What do they have to do? They have to build another site and offload that capacity to another site. So they've been doing that over the last 20-something years because more users, everybody has a cell phone. More users now than there were 20 years ago. The next wave that's coming, or the wave that's here, is 5G. You hear about 5G. You hear about stadiums that were brought up, right? Stadium coverage. 5G offloads that capacity from a 4G site. You go to Fenway Park, you go to TD Garden, you go to Great Woods, you go to an event. Users that are at that venue, carriers want people to use the capacity at that venue and not the capacity that might be a half a mile away, because that site is taking care of another geographic area. So that's the next wave that's coming, is 5G. And what the government has done is they have said, hey, you know what, carriers, you can now, by right, mount on utility poles and go forward and do it for your 5G coverage. You go into Boston, you'll see them. You'll see them on light poles. You'll see them camouflaged. You don't see the cylinders. That's all 5G that's out there. When is that going to come here? It's going to come here eventually, because Internet of Things, more devices using wireless in the business zone, it's going to come downtown. When you get your infrastructure, you get your fiber, they're going to have those microcells to offload. But right now, they need the macro coverage. And T-Mobile, yes, they have a site close to downtown. Their coverage is better than Verizon's. Verizon has had problems in the downtown area and towards the high school because their sites are too far away. So that's right now, that is, I think, the carrier that is predominantly in front of the town.
Thank you. So we are wrapping up here at just past 7, and there's another meeting, but we have one more patient Zoom commenter, Courtney. So we'll end with Courtney.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
Barely. Go ahead.
Can you? Is that better?
Yep.
Courtney Whalen, 65 Dover Street. I just want to make a comment. I know somebody else had previously touched on, a lot of people have touched on some health issues here. And, some people feel like the jury's still out, the research is not appropriate. But again, that Environmental Health Trust versus the FCC, the court ruled in favor of the environmental health groups and petitioners, ordering the FCC to relook at thousands of pages of documentation that were submitted to them. And they were, from organizations, scientists, medical doctors. One of the groups was the American Pediatrics, Academy of American Pediatrics, who is asking the FCC to relook at their 1996, guidelines. They're totally outdated, and they want them to look at it to protecting our most vulnerable, population of children and pregnant women. So, I really think that, in the meantime, the FCC is a captive, organization tasked with promoting the industry and regulating it at the same time. So, we do obviously need to look at studies. Are they coming from industry or are they coming from independent researchers? And so I think in the meantime, if people think the evidence is still out, which, according to thousands of pages of documentation, it is not, that there are health concerns that we should be considering. I really would encourage this community to err on the side of the precautionary principle, that just says, like, if we don't know and we're not sure yet and we still think the jury's out on the science, then to err on the side of caution because the outcomes could be disastrous. So I would really encourage the community to support really looking at that composting site. I'm 100% in favor of, increasing our service. We need it. It is absolutely a public safety issue, but please consider that additional site and not put it at the high school. We're now exposing our kids 6.5 hours a day, plus after school activities, plus sports at that cell tower location. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's just past 7. I want to thank everyone so much for coming. We had about 100 people in total, and thank you very much for the dialogue. I appreciate it. Oh, and we also have a survey. You might have to scan the QR code, and we'll send it out too. Thanks.